Now, as you know, elections are looming in Nigeria. Pick the right candidate for leadership and you could help give rise to great achievements that could make the future better than what has gone before. Pick the wrong candidate and you could be generating dangerous mistakes that could end up harming us all. So that's why up-to-date election analysis is important. Predictive insights into the elections from the specialist researchers at the Center for Democracy and Development, or CDD, here in Abuja. Distilled analysis that they curated from years of assessing Nigerian elections, enhanced by an up-to-date evaluation of the new trends that could play a role in determining the outcome. So what are they predicting for the 2023 election? How much of a reality check is it for the leading candidates? And to what extent is it likely to help voters distinguish the good candidate from the bad? Well, the CDD report is titled The Changing of the Guard. Its lead researcher is Afolabi Adekaiyeoja, and he joins me now in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you've looked at critical trends from past elections. How significant are those trends and patterns, and how relevant are they in 2023? I'm wondering if they could potentially influence the outcome of this election, or whether they've been overtaken by a new sort of unpredictable surge, particularly things like the youth demographic and so on.
Well, what we've seen really is that this election is going to be quite a transitional election. So a lot of what we've been discussing, a lot of what we've been tracking has been the case where much of the data and the trends that we've seen will likely get overturned and will likely get reevaluated in the aftermath of the elections. So for example, very easy or very common statistics like the PDP always carrying the 5 southeastern and 6 south states in previous elections might get changed because of the surge in support for Peter Obi of the Labour Party. Also looking at a very distinct, different election cycle, looking from the Electoral Act, which has made the longest election campaign cycle in recent history, and then even the fact that there's a much more egalitarian access to campaigning, with the advent of social media and with new media and with different other avenues for campaigns to really, spread their messaging around. But what we are still marking is that this election is actually going to be the last leg of this current phase of our democracy. So it's going to be marked by a lot of the trends that we've seen in recent elections. It's going to be marked by the fact that, candidates have still been able to really take on that toga of more personalities over parties. We've seen candidates who've been able to move, the facts, across parties and across different, parts of the political divide, and still being able to carry that support and being able to, carry that influence that they've had in the past. And we're likely going to see that change in future elections. So this election we're using more as a marker, but then it's quite interesting because it gives us the avenue of looking back, but then also looking forward to see things that will change and mark from the future, from elections in the future.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So given what you've just said, beyond these past election trends, what does your research suggest will shape the 2023 election?
So there are three major topics that we're looking at, and they really have different sub-parts. The first one is that this election is really the peak of identity politics that we've had in Nigeria, and that can be looked through three different avenues. The first one is the religion, ethnicity, but the third one, which you've already alluded to, is generation. So even from the beginning, even from 2019, when the PDP selected Atiku Abubakar as the candidate in that election, there was already talk about what does this mean for the rotation of the power in the country. Power from the north to the south, from a Muslim to a Christian, and then that has played a very, very tremendous role in this election. Even intentionally or unintentionally, candidates and parties have been painted or have even almost own that particular narrative, and even decisions such as the APC to fielding a Muslim ticket, and even just the fact that the Labour Party candidate seems to be the most prominent single Christian of the four front runners that we've largely acknowledged, has played a very big role in making sure that these kind of conversations are always at the forefront and that people always keep reflecting on them. Ethnicity has always been, again, a big issue, especially the fact that the country is quite you would say a bit imbalanced in terms of the way the states and the structures are there, but then this is the reality of politics. The fact that the Northwest, for example, is the voter bank in the country, has the largest number of registered voters, and the states there have actually been very effective at voter turnout. You have Kano, Kaduna have consistently been top 5 in terms of voter turnout, and Jigawa that was even first during the 2019 election. But then the big game changer is generation, right? So we've made a very big deal to a degree of the fact that there's a very large block of youth voters. That was the same thing in 2019. The difference is that we expect that there's much more of an enthusiasm to come out and vote. So we've seen very huge, registration drives. We've seen very huge PVC collection drives. We've seen a lot of political sensitization, and obviously the fact that many issues in the country are quite, burdening and quite, pertinent makes it such that everybody's talking about this. So what we're looking now is the fact that what happens when you bring these voters to come out and vote? What happens when you start turning the dial from the voter turnout high of 69% in 2003 to 39% in 2019? What happens when you start changing it and you start moving in the different direction? What happens is that the results change, the trends change. Some things that you previously would have assumed would never have been possible now become things that you are just glaringly looking at. So that's something that we're tracking as things that we're looking at.
That's very interesting. What about internal problems within the parties? I mean, you've got internal agitations within the PDP, for instance, Nyesom Wike and his co-governors for greater equity in the PDP. How much could that be a spoiler?
So the biggest amusement actually of this election cycle is the fact that at every single point where you imagine that a party or a candidate is really just about to now take that momentum and go forward, something happens that almost plays a spoiler role, as you already mentioned. The PDP was in a very good position as the major opposition party to really take advantage of the concerns and quite frankly, some of the policies of the current APC government. But then that will go overshadowed by the fact that, within the party, there were discussions around the fact that governors felt that it wasn't fair that the presidential candidate and the national chair were from the same part of the country. And then now we've seen almost infighting within the APC, where I already alluded earlier, and as your guest spoke to earlier, where governors from APC-controlled states were the ones that took the president and the government to court over the CBN policy. And we're looking at, even statements where the governor of Kaduna State actively comes out and says that that there are elements within the presidency that are trying to spoil their chances of getting re-elected. So these issues are going to play a very big role. But then these issues also point to bigger factors, right? We have parties that ultimately are still vehicles for electoral power. So there hasn't still been a very strong message that is uniting many of these parties. One of the things that we've been looking at is the recent constitutional amendments, where even before they started getting passed, you'd assume that for a National Assembly that has, for a party that has a majority seat in the National Assembly, that they would be able to get their states to really come on board and to support most of the amendments that were there. But then there was still a very clear objection against local government autonomy, for example. So you're looking at different issues where ultimately within these parties there are still structures, there are still existential debates and discussions that are going on. And just being around for like a couple of years, or even just facing the prospect of getting power or not, is now really bringing these questions to the fore.
Right.
Now the question is, will they be able to answer these questions and still get elected? Or will these questions overrule their ability to actually campaign and get back to power?
Let me get you quickly to also talk to us about the PDP's capacity to win in the northern states, because Atiku's supporters have suggested he's likely to get the biggest chunk of votes in that region because he's from there. You talked about the ethnic factor. Does your report accept that suggestion? Briefly, so we can move on to the other parties.
Our report does accept that there is a very strong chance that because ethnicity and religion will play a part in the way that voters come out to vote, that Atiku will be much more competitive and stronger.
Right. What about the APC? How much is the party likely to inherit the Buhari sweep of the north?
Well, that's now where it's a different conversation, because there are two factors that really comes to mind when you look at Buhari. First of all, is is the president's personality, almost an austere Spartan disposition, and none of the candidates, especially Peter Obi, Atiku, and Tinubu, have been able to take on that toga. This anti-corruption man, which is something that was really instrumental to Buhari's campaign from 2003 until his successful election in 2015. So you're looking at really a coalition that's open and that is actually up for grabs. So now our report looks at different dimensions. We're looking at Kwankwaso, who is playing a very important role in this election because as the sole presidential candidate from the Northwest, there is a very strong chance that he might be able to get some of that support. Now the question now becomes, we are still in a country where governors play a very important role in the way that the politics is carried out, and the governors are still divided around the PDP and APC, especially in that part of the country. So now you're not looking at, okay, fine, how much of influence can these structures still carry on, despite the fact that you have governors, you have senators, you have representatives that are actively trying to also get re-elected. And then there are two major facts that we keep emphasizing. One, when you go to the ballot, you're not looking for B or for Tinubu, you're looking at the logo of the party, you're looking at the party that's actually going to be on the ballot. And on the 25th of February, it's not just the presidents that we're going to be voting in. We have senators, we have House of Representative members. And then when you have these particular candidates that are there and are also fighting for their political survival, they're going to be able to push that momentum up the ballot, the same way that they would expect the momentum from the presidential candidates to come down the ballot as well.
Okay, well, what about things like vote buying? How much is that likely to be checkmated by this new central bank Naira redesign policy, keeping in mind today's Supreme Court decision temporarily suspending the deadline to stop using the old Naira notes?
So, interestingly, we were discussing earlier about how the very interesting thing about Nigerian politics is the fact that you could write a report today and by next week it's completely obsolete because something would have come up that you completely did not fathom, and this is something that we didn't. But then, as far as voter trading is concerned, we still think it's going to play an important factor because of one fundamental issue. Nigeria is still plagued by very heavy socio-economic and socio-political issues. You still have high rates of poverty, high unemployment. You have many of these factors that are playing a very important role. And then many people are actually going to be engaging with the elections through the cycle. Do I have the luxury of trying to hope for a month or for 4 years for things to change, or do I just go for the here and now? Which is why one thing that we've been actively trying to do is try to encourage parties, encourage candidates. Really, when you're campaigning and when you're trying to get your message across, focus on a more issue-based campaign, because that is actually the most honest way that we can try and make sure the polity and the politics in the country really gets to a much more elevated and much more respectful manner.
Well, that is very interesting. Thank you very much indeed. I was going to ask you what your prediction is for the 2023 election, but I know that's not fair, and I know you probably won't answer it anyway, so because you are obviously an objective researcher. So thank you very much indeed for that information. Afolabi Adekaiyeoja is a lead researcher at the Center for Democracy and Development, and their new report is titled The Changing of the Guard. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.